Hello everybody, my name is James MacMillan. Welcome to this conversation. I'm joined at the moment by Matt Carmichael, who is going to come to the Cumnock Tryst this year and perform for us on Saturday the 4th of October in a late night concert at the Dumfries Arms Hotel. It's one of our late night festival club events. And Matt Carmichael is a rising star saxophonist, and he's bringing his mesmerising blend of jazz and folk music to Cumnock with music from his latest album, Dancing with Embers. Matt performs with four of his close friends and collaborators, including the pianist Fergus McCreadie, who played in one of the very early Cumnock Tryst festivals right at the beginning when we got started. And they've been playing together since their teenage years. And this remarkable chemistry creates a rich tapestry of sound where melody takes centre stage and collective improvisation flourishes. So it's a wonderful opportunity for our Cumnock Tryst audiences to hear some of Scotland's most exciting young jazz talents in the intimate setting of the Dumfries Arms Hotel on the Saturday evening. So Matt, welcome. Before we get into talking about the music, which people will want to know about, and your background and how you came to be doing what you're doing, your education, your teachers, your influences, and so on. I thought it might be quite interesting for our audience to know what you've been up to recently. That is, what have you been doing with the music in the last few weeks and months?
Yeah. Hi, James. Nice to meet you. The last few months, I released a new album in about springtime, so sort of been sporadically touring that with various things over this year. Last weekend we were in Amsterdam, sort of playing a more chamber group version of this group with just a fiddle player and piano. We're also up in Inverness and Braemar the week before, and kind of been out throughout Europe and Scotland and the UK over the past few months, which has been great to play the music to different audiences and play this specific music in slightly different lineups as well.
That's great. So what is your backstory? Where are you from? Where did you go to school? Where did you study? Who were your teachers? And what would you describe as your influences in the music that you make?
Yeah, so I was born in Cornbridge, just outside Inverness, but moved to just outside Glasgow most of when I was about 4 or 5. I got into playing the saxophone just through a letter from the school. I was really lucky that my council offered instrumental lessons, and saxophone was on the list. I didn't know what the saxophone was, but something about the name of it just seemed quite exotic and exciting. And then I passed the musical aptitude test and was sort of got hooked really straight away. Just sort of went home, learned all the notes, and it kind of just became obsessed with it almost instantly. I don't know why. It's just felt really natural. And then maybe 3 years later or so, I found this jazz teacher called Alan Bovison, who sort of introduced me to jazz and improvisation, and that sort of set me off on another way. I absolutely loved the feeling, the emotion, and improvisation of jazz. Yeah, just sort of went down the jazz train, and through high school I was obsessed with jazz. And then I went to study at RCS at the jazz course there. Sort of when I was presented with the jazz course, it made me explore other types of music. I got really into Scottish folk music and the amazing scene in Glasgow, and that sort of became something I was really into. Yeah, I guess I started to write my own music when I was about 16, 17, and sort of this blend of jazz and folk sort of naturally emerged just because of the music I was listening to and the musicians I was collaborating with. And yeah, I left. I'm about 26 now, I guess freelance musician living in Glasgow, and really happy to be playing music as a career.
And in a lot of the blurb about your work, and obviously in even just some of the first few moments of listening and watching you perform on YouTube and elsewhere, it's quite clear that there's this mixture of what we would describe as jazz and folk. It seems a strange mixture. Is it unique? Is it something that hasn't been done before in Scotland?
No, I mean it has been done by various musicians in Scotland and all around the world. I guess jazz has been combined with Brazilian music, with Norway, with Norwegian folk. But I think it's also something you can't necessarily describe as that's jazz and folk. Within that, there's lots of subgenres, or everyone's sort of got their own. Like this is, I'm not the only person to do this. It's been done before, but I think everyone sort of has their unique sort of take on it. And I think living in Scotland, it's just natural for this music to seep into, like jazz is an American art form. We're living in Scotland, very much influenced by that American art form, but also by music and musicians around us.
And does that mean that you have a mixed audience, as it were? You have people coming from the folk scene as well as the jazz world?
I think so. There's a mixture, and I guess that's a good thing, and also can be alienating sometimes, because some of my albums or gigs with jazz musicians, they might typical jazz ones be like, oh yeah, this is it, but then maybe some of it they might not be into, and vice versa. It might be with a folk audience. So I guess cultivating a unique audience of your own that kind of vaguely come from fringes of jazz and folk, but also come from other places is kind of what's happening, I guess.
And what do the jazzers think of your folk-inflected music? And consequently, what does the folk audience think about the jazz element?
Yeah, I guess it depends who you ask. I think there's lots of schools in jazz, like super traditionalist, straight down the line. It should be sort of the sound of 50s and 60s and not any music after. And then there's also the innovators sort of in jazz who believe it's always a reflection of the times, and like this, it's not like a categorized thing. So it's both sides, and also with folk, I think there's people who will be. I think there's a lot of folk musicians who play with me, so that in some way sort of authenticates it as well as me sort of studying the music. But I think it's a mixture. Like we can't win all audiences, but I think it depends on your viewpoint. If you're sort of a traditionalist on each side, or more open to different things.
And at the RCS, where you studied, the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, there are quite intense courses there in jazz and folk. Were you able to, or traditional music, what did you partake in both or absorb something of both when you were there?
I think it's more to do with the musicians who were there. So there were some musicians interested in both, and also you had the opportunity. I jammed with like pipers or cello players or fiddle players whilst I was there. So I think most of that experience probably came from the relationships and friends I had there. But it was also, I think the course was quite open-minded in the sense it wasn't like a super traditionalist course. There was a tradition of jazz there, which I think is really, really important. And I think I've spent a lot of time in the tradition of jazz, even though my music doesn't directly sound like it's from the 1950s and 60s. But I think there was, in Glasgow anyway, there was an open-mindedness which allows for that sort of exploration.
The Cumnock Tryst is essentially or substantially a classical music festival, but we have very open arms to a number of very different styles, and jazz has featured quite a lot, and folk music as well, actually, over the years. I used to be, when I was much, much younger, used to play in folk bands around about the pubs and folk clubs of the west of Scotland, and I've always had a deep love of the Scottish tradition. But I wanted to ask you about improvisation. It's such an essential part of jazz, and it's something that classical musicians sometimes have a real terror about. It's very difficult sometimes to get classical musicians to improvise. It's not something that's part of the tradition in their teaching and training and so on. But a lot of the work that we do with the Cumnock Tryst involves going into schools because, as you're probably aware, composition is part of the curriculum in Scotland and south of the border. And one of the first things that I ask them to do is to start improvising. And it's a bit of a shock because they're not expecting it. Although I begin to see now that they've such a wide experience of so many different forms of music that they rely on whatever jazz experiences they've had. And it's such an important first step for young composers, I think, nowadays, to feel the immediacy of their work. So I wonder if you could maybe tell us and our listeners, our viewers tonight, about improvisation. Why is improvisation such an important central ingredient of jazz? Why has it always been there? What is it? And how does it affect your own work?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I guess maybe starting with my own work, I'm really interested in sort of the join. I guess in jazz, there's lots of sub sort of genres of vocabulary. That's sort of like bebop vocabulary. There's more free jazz vocabulary. There's a lot of different vocabulary, but I'm interested in sort of as an overall musical vocabulary within improvisation. So with folk musicians, even though they might not play with lots of chromaticisms that's maybe in jazz, it's still completely improvisation. So I think with my band, there's sort of a distinct language that comes from jazz tradition, but also it's maybe a little bit more diatonic, not as much chromaticism necessarily, which also lends to the folk musicians who are coming from slightly more sort of diatonic, major bass scales, minor bass scales that are more less chromatic. And I think I'm interested in that space personally, improvising with folk musicians. I guess also harmonically the music is I guess it depends. Some of my later music is maybe more harmonically involved, but I think I quite like to have the harmony quite open. So there's a lot of like open fifths and sort of thing, which is typical in Scottish music. But as a jazz improviser, it gives a lot of space for all different harmonies to come within that, lots of different tensions within that. Whereas quite a lot of jazz is maybe very specific harmony, like very dense and specific what you play over it. But when it's so open, on gigs, that means the music's a lot more different things can happen. As when we play gigs, like the material, improvisation is so important. The material on the albums is maybe like a direct version of the music, but on gigs it's kind of much more open, and the material sort of a starting point to be improvised. I think there's a lot of questions to answer from your one question. I've maybe skirted around it, but
it's fascinating. I know that in my world, in my experience as a so-called classical composer, and we sometimes use the term contemporary classical music. I've had to deal with questions about style and aesthetic ever since I was very young, and sometimes they can be useful questions that can make you probe your own style and aesthetic. Sometimes they just plague you in that you've got to give it accounts of where you're coming from. And when I was younger, we used to talk about the avant-garde a lot and the influence of great composers from the 60s and 70s. And it can be it's much more open and diverse now, I suppose, but we still have to deal with questions of style and aesthetic. And I get asked, what is your musical style and what are the aesthetics? Do you get that as well? I mean, you've given a very good account of certain cross currents in your music, but if it was to go beyond that into style and aesthetic, how would you deal with questions like that?
Yeah, I mean, you do get that in reviewers or something saying this isn't jazz, this is folk, or this isn't folk, this is jazz. And also I am very interested in folk music, but I'm interested in a lot of other music, and I think that seeps into the music as well. So you can also be boxed into this is jazz folk, But my music, I think it'll always have a folk element in the jazz, but like it's going to evolve year by year. So I don't like to think of in boxes too much because the music's sort of ever evolving. But I guess for like promoters and reviewers, they like to put things into a certain box. But yeah, it is things that come up, or people like to put clear boundaries and things.
When I was listening and searching out a lot of your work online and in YouTube, I noticed may just have been the one concert, but maybe more. You were working with big bands or a big band. I think it was in Germany, the WDR big band. Is that something you do a lot as well?
They sort of got in touch randomly when I released my first album, and the chief conductor was going to arrange sort of that first album for the big band, and then I was invited back last year, and then we sort of split the arrangements this time. So that was a much more intense project and something new to explore in a way that I hadn't. Big challenge, but very rewarding. But it's interesting to transfer, because the small group and the albums are kind of much more direct and much more free flowing with the improvisation. But when you've got the musicians who want to know exactly what to play, it's hard to interpret. And also with like the sounds of, I mean, I play saxophone, but with lots of saxophones and brass, trombones and trumpets, sort of making that stylistically, aesthetically in keeping with the music is a challenge. And also, I guess, different arrangers, like there was another arranger working on it, who knows a lot more about the big band sound, but maybe it didn't sound as much like my music. And then I did some, and then maybe it doesn't sound as proper like a big band, but I guess it's coming from the same place as the music. So it was definitely an interesting learning experience. So you
did some of the arrangements yourself in that project.
Yeah, kind of split the one a few months ago. Yeah.
It was amazing. It was some really beautiful, strange, ethereal sounds. And is that something that you will continue with? Doing the larger scale work as well?
Something I'm definitely interested in. I guess I've been approached for different sort of larger scale things. Yeah, it's something I love to. I guess it's your own music, so it's kind of personal. And I'd like to be able to do it myself in a way, or find the right people to work with. But definitely something I'd love to do more of in the future, and sort of study and become more. Because I guess at the moment I'm much more confident as an improviser and sort of a less large ensemble orchestrator. But it's something I'd definitely love to study and be able to do, to sort of expand into not just this sort of short form, but like longer form ways that sometimes the music emerges on live gigs. Like sometimes we might play a full 45-minute set, which is like a improvised sort of collection of our tunes, or like based on the themes of our tunes. So like I love to have that sort of concept in a longer form thing someday.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dated term, but the term or the notion of symphonic jazz came to mind on hearing some of the music. When I was very young, as a teenager, I got very interested in an American jazz musician called Stan Kenton. I don't know if he's still studied and admired, but I mean, he was into classical music, as a lot of them were actually, and they did arrangements of classical music. And he did these incredible arrangements of Wagner's music. I remember at one time, Richard Strauss, Sprach Zarathustra, and so on. I was completely blown away with it. I also got to meet him, aged 14, at the Kelvin Hall in Glasgow, which was a great moment in my. I was a young trumpeter at the time, so I was into that kind of music. It took me back a bit to that experience, that sound world in a way, and I wonder if you can see that there might be other collaborations. You seem to be very keen to collaborate, the collaboration of jazz and folk, of course, and now this bigger palette of the big band. Are there other collaborations on the horizon for you?
Not like that. I'm going to record another album um the end of this year, and I think I'd quite like the focus of that to be on the improvised sort of live sound of the band, because some of my previous albums I've maybe been a bit purposely direct or wanting to make the tunes more like a song or shorter form, not as necessarily as spread out as a live gig is. So I'd quite like to, on the next album, kind of more focus on the live sound of the band and taking more risks. But yeah, there's not anything set in stone with a larger ensemble in the future, but definitely things potentially.
And you seem to be very interested and attracted by song and songwriters. So you've mentioned the songwriters that you've worked with in some of the material I've read about you, and that seems to be and I can get that impression from music. There's almost like a song going on, a song structure. You seem to be singing with your saxophone. There's a sort of song dimension to what you do, which is one of the most beautiful things about the music that I imagine you're going to bring to Cumnock. Do you want to say a little bit about that, about the songwriters and the concept of song that's been so important to you?
Yeah, I guess the directness of like someone just singing with a guitar, just them and a guitar, and the sort of directness and openness and vulnerability really attracts me, and that's also what I love about small sort of ensemble playing, is like the sort of that direct communication, because that's something that always moves me a lot. So I guess I've sort of wanted to, saxophone sometimes in jazz it can be very instrumental, but I've also been very interested in copying or like playing along, learning from inflections and the way different songwriters in jazz, but also outside of jazz, sort of approach melody and the directness of melody. And also, also been a lot of jazz, maybe improvised jazz, states the melody once and then it's off to the solos. But I think influenced by folk music as well, I've always been drawn to having the melody at the forefront as well.
Great. Finally, Matt, have you ever been to Cumnock before?
I think I have. There was a project with Nijos and Drake Music Scotland, maybe 5-6 years ago when I was in high school or something.
Yeah, that was a Cumnock Tryst event, I think.
So yeah, I've been there once, but not since. So
well, we're looking forward to welcome you in Cumnock in October. Could you say a little bit finally about the music that you'll be featuring at the Tryst this year?
I'll be bringing my band with Fergus McCreadie on piano, Ali Watson bass, Stephen Henderson drums, and sometimes Shruti Box he brings as well, and Charlie Stewart on the fiddle. I guess we'll be playing some music from our new album, which we've been touring, as well as some other things from our past, and sometimes we play some folk tunes amongst there. But probably mostly from the new album as well as some from previous. But I don't usually make set lists. Kind of usually spontaneous. Kind of keeps it fresh.
That's great. We're looking forward so much to welcoming you to the Tryst in just a few weeks now. So thank you very, very much for the conversation this evening, Matt Carmichael. All the best to you.
No worries. Thanks, James. Really nice to chat.